Let me make this clear. I've never told this story to anyone due to the fact of me looking like some crazy person. But I needed to get this off my chest and let the world know what happened that night. The car rolled to a stop, gravel crunching beneath the tires as the looming silhouette of Blackwood House emerged from the mist. It was as if the house had been waiting for us. The headlights cut through the fog, barely illuminating the skeletal frame of the once grand mansion. Shutters hung loose like broken limbs, and ivy crawled up the stone, slowly strangling the structure. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something faintly metallic that I couldn't place. Damn, Aaron muttered from the back seat. It's even worse in person. You expected a cozy bed and breakfast? Sarah shot back. Her tone clipped, but I could tell she was just as nervous as the rest of us. Her knuckles were white, gripping the strap of her backpack. Thrill-seeking was her idea after all. But now that we were here, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. Come on, this is what we came for. I turned off the engine and let the silence settle around us. No one moved. The anticipation was palpable, like a drawn breath waiting to be released. I glanced at Max in the passenger seat. He was always the calm one, the skeptic. But tonight he seemed distant, staring out at the house as if trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. I don't know, man, Max finally said. This place, it feels wrong. Exactly, I replied, forcing a grin. That's the point. We piled out of the car, our shoes sinking into the muddy ground as we approached the gate. The house loomed above us, every step toward it feeling heavier, as though we were walking into something alive. We had all done the research, extensive research, in fact. That's what drew us here. The stories about the Blackwood family were part of Southern folklore. Mysterious disappearances, tragic deaths, rumors of occult practices. The kind of stories that thrill-seekers like us lived for. But standing here now, I wasn't so sure. The front door was swollen with moisture, the wood warping under the years of neglect. Aaron gave it a hard shove and it groaned open, the sound echoing in the emptiness beyond. We stepped inside, our footsteps loud against the creaking floorboards. The house smelled of decay and something ancient, like dust that had never been disturbed. This place is massive, Sarah whispered, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. The foyer stretched out before us, an intricate chandelier hanging precariously above, its crystals dulled by years of grime. A grand staircase wound up into the shadows, and doorways yawned open on either side, leading into rooms swallowed by darkness. We stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. It felt as though the house was watching us, assessing its new occupants. Let's set up, I suggested, more to break the silence than anything. We didn't drive all this way to stand in the entrance. We made our way into the parlor where faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing dark stains beneath. Aaron, always the most practical, pulled out his phone and began recording. Might as well document this, he said. Who knows, maybe we'll catch something on camera. We all laughed, but it was forced, the sound hollow in the cavernous room. Max wandered over to the fireplace, running his hand along the stone mantel. You really believe all those stories? The family killing each other? The whole cursed land thing? I don't know, Sarah answered. But people believed it. There were documented disappearances. The Blackwoods just vanished. Maybe they left, Aaron said. Ran off to start a new life somewhere. Or maybe, I interjected, they're still here. We all exchanged uneasy glances. That was the unspoken fear, wasn't it? The thought that the house wasn't empty, not really. That something lingered here, unseen but watching, waiting. The evening passed in a strange haze. We explored the house, room by room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like fragile lifelines. Each room seemed worse than the last. The walls bore old scars, claw marks, deep scratches as if something had tried to claw its way out. Furniture was overturned, glass shattered. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, we found a broken mirror, its jagged edges reflecting the beam of our lights in disorienting patterns. This room gives me the creeps, Sarah said, standing in the doorway, her voice unusually quiet. I had to agree. There was something off about the room, as if the air was thicker, pressing in on us. I stepped inside, but an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, stopping me in my tracks. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was sure I saw a figure standing in the corner just at the edge of my vision. I blinked, and it was gone. "I think we should stick together," Max said, his usual bravado faltering. "I'm not scared," Aaron scoffed, but even he seemed on edge, his eyes darting to every shadow. "It's just an old house." But it didn't feel like just an old house. There was a presence here, something we couldn't see but could feel. The air buzzed with static, the floor creaked with every step, as if the house itself was shifting beneath us. Night fell quickly, and with it came the storm. Wind howled through the broken windows, rattling the shutters like bones shaking in their sockets. Rain lashed against the house, the sound like whispers in the darkness. We gathered in the living room, lighting a few candles to fight back the oppressive shadows. The storm felt alive, as if it was trying to break in, to claim us. Max had become unusually quiet. He sat in the corner, staring at the rain-soaked windows, his face pale, eyes distant. "What's up with you?" I asked, my voice barely cutting through the roar of the wind. He didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "I think I've been here before." "What? We've never—" "Not in this life," he cut me off, his voice hollow. His gaze drifted toward the dark hallway. "I've seen this place. In dreams." Things started happening fast after that. Objects moved when no one was looking. Small things at first. Sarah's flashlight, which she swore she left on the mantel, was suddenly on the floor. A door that had been closed moments before now stood wide open. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. And then Max vanished. One moment he was sitting right there, his eyes locked on something only he could see, and the next, he was gone. We searched the house, calling his name, our voices growing more frantic with every unanswered echo. But there was no sign of him. No footprints, no struggle. Just gone. "Maybe he went outside," Aaron suggested, but his voice wavered. Sarah's breathing had become ragged. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if she expected something to come charging down the hallway at any moment. "I don't like this," she muttered. "We need to leave." But Aaron shook his head. "We can't. The storm's too bad. Besides, Max might still be here. We can't just leave him." I wanted to agree, but something was gnawing at the back of my mind. Max's behavior, his strange comment about having seen the house before. It felt like the house was playing with us, feeding on our fears, twisting reality until we couldn't tell what was real anymore. I felt the weight of the house bearing down on me, like it was sinking its claws into my mind, making it impossible to think clearly. By midnight, the storm had reached its peak. The wind screamed through the cracks in the walls, shaking the foundation. The candles flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls that seemed to dance and writhe, taking on shapes that made my skin crawl. We huddled together in the center of the living room, too afraid to move. Aaron stood suddenly. "I'm going to find Max." "You can't just—" But he was already gone, disappearing into the hallway before I could stop him. I wanted to chase after him, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. Sarah was trembling, her hands clutching her arms as she rocked back and forth. "This house isn't right," she whispered. "It's alive. I can feel it." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was just an old building and our minds were playing tricks on us. But deep down, I knew she was right. This place wasn't just haunted by the memories of the dead. It was feeding on us. And it wasn't finished yet. The next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming toward me from the hallway. I opened my eyes to find the living room empty. Sarah was gone. The candles had burned down to stubs, and the darkness pressed in around me. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt like lead, as if the house was holding me in place, forcing me to stay, to watch. And then I saw them. 2 figures stood in the doorway, their faces obscured by the shadows. But I knew who they were. Max and Aaron. Only, they weren't the same. Their eyes were blank, their expressions void of any humanity. They stepped forward in unison, their movements slow and mechanical. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The 2 figures, Max and Aaron, or whatever was left of them, moved toward me in unison, their blank eyes locked on mine. My heart raced in my chest, pounding so loudly I could barely hear the storm outside anymore. They didn't blink, didn't speak, and their footsteps barely made a sound on the creaking floorboards. It was as if the house itself had absorbed them, taken them in, and now they were just empty shells. I wanted to scream, to get up and run, but my legs refused to cooperate. It was like some unseen force had pinned me down, the weight of the house pressing down on my chest. My breath came in short, shallow bursts, panic taking over. "Max, Aaron," I croaked, my voice weak and trembling. What are you doing?" They said nothing, just kept moving toward me, their eyes hollow, devoid of life. I felt something cold and sharp in the air, like a tangible dread sinking into my bones. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real, but every inch of me knew it was. They stopped just a few feet away, their bodies rigid and still. I looked up into Max's face, searching for some trace of my friend, but there was nothing there. His expression was a blank slate, his lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Not a smile of warmth or humor. No, this was something far darker, like a twisted mockery of what he used to be. And then, in the silence, Max spoke. "I told you. I've been here before." His voice was wrong, hollow, like the words weren't really his but were being fed through him, as if the house itself was speaking through his mouth. "I knew you'd come," he continued, the same eerie smile stretching wider on his face. "We've all been here before." I shook my head, my throat tightening. "What are you talking about? This is crazy. This isn't happening." Aaron's blank eyes shifted toward me, his mouth opening slowly, mechanically. "We never left," he whispered. "None of us ever leave." That's when I noticed something so subtle, but horrifying once it hit me. The air had changed. It smelled different, damp, rotten, like soil. I glanced around the room, and in the flickering candlelight I could see it. The floorboards beneath my feet were decaying. Cracks were forming along the wood, and something black, thick, and oily was seeping up from the ground. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. The house was rotting. No, not just the house. Everything was. The walls, the floors, the air, even Max and Aaron. Their skin, which had once seemed normal, was now turning a sickly gray, cracking like dried clay. I tried to move, tried to push myself up, but my body felt like it was glued to the spot. I couldn't escape. I couldn't even scream. I was stuck in the nightmare, trapped by whatever curse this place held. "Sarah," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Where's Sarah?" Max's head tilted, almost as if he were considering my question, and then he pointed toward the stairs. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a puppet on strings. "Upstairs," he said softly. "She's waiting for you." My heart sank. I didn't want to go upstairs. I didn't want to see whatever was up there, but I knew I had no choice. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't going to stop. Not until it had claimed all of us. Max and Aaron stood there waiting, their eyes still locked on me. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me, and made my way toward the staircase. Each step felt like it took a lifetime, the air growing heavier, thicker, the deeper I went into the house. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand gripping the banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sound of my footsteps echoed around me, but underneath it all, I swore I could hear something else. A faint humming, like a low rhythmic chant. It was coming from above, from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. The upstairs hallway was darker than the rest of the house, the walls covered in faded, peeling wallpaper. The same black substance that had seeped up from the floors downstairs was now oozing down the walls like tar. The smell was suffocating, damp and rotten, mixed with something metallic. My stomach churned again, but I kept moving. When I reached the door at the end of the hall, I hesitated. I knew Sarah was in there, at least what was left of her. But part of me didn't want to open that door. Part of me wanted to turn around, to run, to get the hell out of this place and never look back. But I couldn't leave her, not without knowing. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was small, with just a single window that looked out over the overgrown backyard. The walls were covered in more of that peeling wallpaper, the floorboards cracked and splintered, and in the center of the room, sitting in an old wooden chair, was Sarah. Her back was to me, her long dark hair hanging limp around her shoulders. The same black substance was pooling around her feet, seeping up from the floor. "Sarah?" I whispered, taking a cautious step forward. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring out the window. I swallowed hard and took another step. "Sarah?" And then slowly, she turned her head. Her face was wrong. It wasn't Sarah. Not anymore. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide, empty, just like Max and Aaron's. But her lips were twisted into a grotesque grin, stretched too wide, too unnatural. "We've been waiting for you," she whispered, her voice raspy, almost inhuman. My heart stopped. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, and fell to the floor. The black substance was spreading, creeping toward me, like it had a life of its own. "We're all part of the house now," Sarah continued, her voice echoing in the small room. "And soon, you will be too." The last thing I saw before everything went dark was her smile, wide, cold, and utterly devoid of life. Suddenly, the room went dark, and I passed out. We all woke up laying spread across the floor. The house was quiet, the storm had passed, and sunlight was streaming through the cracked windows. I was lying on the living room floor, my head pounding, my body sore. There was no sign of Max, Aaron, or Sarah. I got up slowly, my legs weak, and stumbled to the front door. The house was silent, still, as if nothing had ever happened. I made my way outside, the fresh air hitting me like a slap in the face. The car was still there, parked where we had left it. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, desperate to get away from this place, to leave it behind for good. The group came right behind me and got in the car. The car jolted as we hit a pothole, but I didn't care. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror until it finally disappeared behind the trees. The silence in the car was heavy. None of us said a word as we sped down the winding country road, leaving the nightmare behind. We were safe. We had made it out. A week passed, and the terror of that night at the Blackwood house started to feel more like a dream. A twisted memory buried beneath mundane routines. I was starting to think maybe it wasn't real, that my mind had exaggerated what happened in the dark corridors, that the sounds and shadows had been nothing but paranoia. But then, one evening, while I was lazily flipping through TV channels, something made me freeze. A news report flashed on the screen, the familiar sight of the Blackwood house glaring back at me, its dark windows like empty eyes. My heart skipped a beat, the room around me suddenly feeling colder, smaller. The bodies of a young couple were discovered inside the infamous Blackwood house late last night, the reporter's voice droned. The camera cut to images of the police swarming the property, yellow tape cordoning off the entrance. The couple, both in their mid-20s, had been missing for several days before their remains were found in a second-floor bedroom. The cause of death is still under investigation, but authorities suspect foul play. I sat up straight, my chest tight, heart racing. I recognized the faces they showed next on the screen, a photo of the couple, smiling in happier times. It was the same couple we had seen earlier that night at the gas station before we'd headed toward the Blackwood house. They had been standing beside their car, filling up just as we were. I remembered the woman's nervous laughter, the way the guy had joked about them checking out the haunted house like it was a game. My stomach churned as a wave of dread washed over me. They had gone to the house. They hadn't made it out. The reporter continued, "The house has long been the subject of local legends, and some believe it to be cursed after a series of mysterious deaths dating back to the 19th century." The screen flashed back to the eerie facade of the house, then to the couple's faces, smiling, alive. Suddenly, the air in the room felt suffocating. It hit me all at once. We had gotten out. But what if we hadn't? What if something had followed us, or worse, let us go, only to claim them instead? I reached for my phone and dialed Sarah. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too calm. "Did you see the news?" "Yeah." My voice was shaky. "It's the same couple, isn't it?" She hesitated before replying, "Yeah, it is." I could hear the fear in her voice matching my own. "What if—" I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't want to say it aloud. I didn't want it to be real. "What if we were supposed to die in there?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What if we were just lucky?" I felt the same chill that had gripped me in the house creep back into my bones. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every strange noise, every shadow, every breathless second we spent in that cursed place. It was as if we had passed some test without even knowing it. The news report ended, but the sense of unease stayed. I couldn't shake the feeling that our escape wasn't complete, that the Blackwood house hadn't finished with us yet. The screen flickered off, leaving me alone in the dark room. I glanced at the shadows in the corners, at the reflection in the window, half expecting to see something standing there, watching.